Alright, this is gonna be a long video, so I need to explain this quickly. My friend Justin over at ShuffleQuest tweeted out a collage depicting his favorite album from every year he's been alive. I thought it was a great idea. I'm gonna borrow it for this video. Everybody go subscribe to ShuffleQuest. But things are gonna get a little bit more complicated. The end result of this is also gonna be my collage of my favorite album from every year I've been alive, but I'm gonna go through a top 10 album collage for every one of those years. So basically, I'm going to say the year, show you 10 of my favorite albums from that year in no particular order, give a short description of them, then single out my absolute favorite from that year to go into the final collage, and we move on. The point of this is for me to talk about albums that I've never really gotten the chance to talk about. You guys will be getting 240 album recommendations, whether they be classics or random albums that you might have missed. You get to see my musical blind spots and let me know if you think I'm missing anything. And it was just fun doing this. Let's go. So starting off in the year of my birth, 1997, this is what we're looking like. I finally took a deep dive into Ween last year, and The Mollusk is what I would suggest to anyone that wants to check them out. Very playful and dreamlike. Baduizm is one of the great neo-soul albums, a lush, genre-defining project. Probably my second favorite Bjork album, Unravel is an unbelievable song. Life After Death is a little bit bloated, but it also has several of the best hip-hop songs of all time. This album as a whole isn't anything mind-blowing, but Semi-Charmed Life going into Jumper is unreal. This is always the little brother to Discovery and Random Access Memories, but it's still a must-listen at one point or another. One of the best albums ever made. Cold, melancholic genius from start to finish. Definitely my favorite project from him, and an all-time great singer-songwriter album. Missy's first album is probably her best album. Her and Timbaland is a match made in heaven. This is probably the album that I've listened to least out of this list, but that's just because I recently started doing my deep dive into Modest Mouse. It's raw, it's sad, and on a first listen, I knew it was special. So while I do really love two of these albums, there's only one answer here. OK Computer is essential listening for everyone, and it's had a special place in my heart for a long time. It's one of the albums that really made me fall in love with music. For the year 1998, we have a very hip-hop dominant list with a few obvious exceptions. The Love Movement is definitely the worst Tribe album, but I would argue that it was ahead of its time and well worth checking out for any neo-soul / hip-hop fans. Elliott released two perfect or near-perfect albums in back-to-back years, and it is so impressive. Waltz 2 kills me every single time. The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill is introspective and passionate to the core. She might be the best ever sing-rapper or rap singer, whatever you want to call it. This is an album that I think many new school Gen Z hip-hop fans have probably missed. DMX is one of a kind, and this is a classic rap album. And the same would probably go for Capital Punishment too. Specifically, I would suggest this album for hip-hop fans that love lyricism more than anything else. Probably my favorite Outkast album. This is the first vinyl that I ever bought, and it features the musical marvel that is Spodiote Dopalicious. Legendary. An absurd, noisy indie folk project that deserves all of its accolades and more. There's a reason why music nerds obsess over this thing. This might be the least popular out of this list, and I just want to make sure you know what you'd be getting into. Effortlessly cool ambient pop that is just nice. It's a wonderful album that will almost certainly improve your life, even if it's just for 45 minutes. Two of the most underrated rappers of all time, with some of the best lyrics and flows you'll ever hear. Not the best, not the worst, I mainly just included it for Hard Knock Life. This was a choice between a few classics and a low-key personal favorite. Radiohead and Neutral Milk Hotel going back to back is a little bit obnoxious, but it is what it is. This is yet another album that really took me to another level when it came to falling in love with music. For the year 1999, if I'm being completely honest, I think this is the list that I have the smallest connection to. I don't think this album is anything too special, though it was important for pop punk. The White Stripes debut is lo-fi, kinda minimalist, and it definitely gets the job done. Tracks 1 and 3 really kick things things off to a good start. One of the best conscious rap albums of all time, but it's not exactly something that I listen to a lot. The lyrics and production are near perfect, though. I'd be lying if I said this wasn't one of my favorite hip-hop albums growing up. It's sarcastic, vulgar, but generally pretty entertaining throughout, even if all the craziness gets old after a while. Arguably the #1 definitive Midwest emo album. Never Meant is easily one of my favorite songs of 1999. Black on Both Sides is what made me a huge Mos Def fan growing up. I'm not kidding when I tell you that I wrote a 10-page paper on this album in college. One of the best to ever do it, and this is probably her best album. Fiona's voice may be the star of the show, but you also need to mention some next level production too. Funny and kind of confusing in a weird way, but that's what makes the journey so amusing. Definitely not his best, but I think this would be an interesting way to introduce someone to Doom. When it's good, it's great, but there are a few songs that I don't exactly love. For anybody not familiar with this album, go download it right now. It is the best live album ever made, and Long Season is quite possibly the absolute pinnacle of music. Seriously, I debated with a few different choices for a second, but it wasn't really close. When you listen to Long Season, you'll know exactly what I mean. 2000 was both a very strong year for music, and it's worth noting how different many of these albums are from one another. D'Angelo's Voodoo is probably right above Baduizm for my favorite neo-soul project ever. The amount of classic rap songs on Stankonia is ridiculous, and this is right up there with the best of them in the Outkast discography. I checked this one out pretty recently, and I'm glad I did. Super melodic, and The Crystal Lake is a perfect song. Quite possibly the best album from one of the best technical rappers of all time. Radiohead making OK Computer and then Kid A back to back shouldn't be possible. Their discography is superhuman stuff, and Kid A is a mysterious, ethereal representation of that. I've always said that context enhances music, and this is very true for Solitary Man. Knowing all of Cash's struggles and then hearing I Won't Back Down is incredibly moving. Plain and simple, this is one of the happiest albums in the history of music. Without a doubt, my favorite soundtrack ever. If you haven't seen this movie, add it to the top of your list as soon as possible. This is Eminem's best album. Yeah, some of the tracks and skits are a little bit much, but Stan and The Real Slim Shady on one album is pretty fantastic. Country Grammar doesn't even really compare to anything else on this list, but it's fun, and I think this is a sign that I need to check out a few more classics from this year. These four are indeed some of my favorite albums ever, but Oh Brother just hits me in a completely different way. It puts me in such a specific place, it makes me laugh, and everything works so well together. The year 2001 has a few near-perfect albums, and the rest are well worth checking out too. White Blood Cells is yet another minimalistic, raw project from the White Stripes. Their discography is super consistent, and this is another example of that. The Blueprint is one of the main albums that made me fall in love with hip-hop. Half the album is full of greatest hits. Certainly not their best in my opinion, but Gorillaz Self-Titled proves that they're one of the most eclectic groups in all of music. So many different styles blended really well in this thing. Yes, every single Radiohead album eligible either made its respective list or came very, very close. The Green album is kinda just okay, but Hashpipe and Island in the Sun are obviously very memorable. This album has always been a little bit of a mystery for me. I keep finding new things to love about it every time I revisit it. The Strokes' debut, in my opinion, is one of the best debut albums ever made. Very nostalgic, warm, and so cohesive from start to finish. John Mayer is one of my favorite storytellers, and Room for Squares is where my love for him began. Those first 4 tracks are special. Here's where I make a hot take and say that this is Daft Punk's second best album, and coincidentally, I'm also gonna say that these first 4 tracks are very, very special. This is my favorite Bjork album. There's something about the romance on this thing that just takes my breath away. Even though The Blueprints and Room for Squares have always been some of my favorites ever, I've been in a huge Bjork period recently, and she's gonna take this spot. 2002 is a year that I really need to work on. There are a bunch of albums that I like here. Norah Jones is lovely. LP's debut is his best work. Lord Willin is an early 2000s hip-hop staple. Same thing with Quality quality. The Eminem Show has a few great tracks on it. This is my favorite Coldplay album. Justified is so nostalgic to me. This has my favorite Roots song on it, and the Headphone Masterpiece is very intriguing, but Yankee Hotel Foxtrot is one of my favorite albums ever. It really defines the word bittersweet for me, and Jesus Etc. and I Am Trying to Break Your Heart are some of my favorite songs ever. Without a doubt, this is my pick for 2002. 2003 is weird for me because I really enjoy pretty much every album I have listed, but none of them stick out to me as life-changing, or something like that. Probably Death Cab for Cutie's best album, but I've never really been a super fan of their stuff. This is a great Sufjan album, and it does have a special place in my heart, but I don't think it's even close to some of the stuff that we'll talk about later. Definitely underrated in Doom's discography. It's a little colder, a little creepier than his usual stuff, and it's interesting to compare and contrast. I've just never really been a double album kind of guy, even if they are experimenting with the idea of how to make a double album. Well worth the listen, even if you are just doing it to check out some all-time great Strokes tracks. I was kinda grasping at straws with this one. Crazy in Love is cool and all, but the album as a whole is just kinda average. I would say this is a little bit more refined than their previous releases, and it has Seven Nation Army on it, which is never a bad thing. I'm more of a Blueprint guy than a Black Album guy, but this does have some historic rap songs on it with next level production. This wouldn't even be in my top 5 Radiohead albums, but it's still better than most bands' best album. Like I said, Radiohead is ridiculous. And Get Rich or Die Tryin' is a decent album with a few standout tracks. Any album featuring 21 Questions probably would have made it on this list. I think the Black Album stands out the most out of all of these. Just Blaze, Kanye, and Timbaland made some of their best beats ever, and this is a top-tier rap album, even if it's not one of my personal favorites. For 2004, I think we have somewhat of a better example of what I was talking about in 2002. A lot of albums that I really like, but one clear winner. Franz Ferdinand's debut is energetic and fun. This Modest Mouse album is a little bit more accessible than some of their stuff. Arcade Fire's Funeral is something I respect, but I've never really gotten into myself. Food is probably Doom's best, but it's still not something that I listen to often. Hot Fuss is enjoyable, but not exactly unique. American Idiot is a good protest album, but it doesn't do a whole lot for me. Again, Doom is great, but he's just not really my thing. There are a few classic songs on this Usher album, and I can't pass up mentioning Sufjan, but The College Dropout is one of my favorite albums ever. I think it's perfect in every way. This album gave music a whole new meaning to me at a young age, and it's the best album of 2004 in my opinion. 2005 has a solid blend of stuff that I like, but haven't explored too deeply, and some all-time life-changing favorites. Demon Days is the best Gorillaz album. From my perspective, Feel Good Inc. and Dare are both 10 out of 10 songs. LCD Sound System's debut is catchy, lighthearted, and it shows how unique this group is. Feels has some really fascinating song structures, and I think it deserves more credit when people discuss what's best in their discography. The Woods goes so hard. It's a rebellious, angry call, and I think it might be one of the best rock albums of the 2000s. Common's B is soothing, it's warm, and I think this is the perfect example of what conscious hip-hop has to offer. I'm Wide Awake, It's Morning is melancholic romanticism at its finest. Some of the best storytelling I've ever heard. Fiona Apple really takes her time in between releases, and the hard work pays off. Not my favorite release from her, but it's worth checking out. I think Late Registration is one of Kanye's best albums, but it's never really been one of my personal favorites. It's still incredible though. Sufjan's second best album, in my opinion. There are so many layers to this thing, and I could go on and on forever. It's very dense, but it rewards you with each re-listen. Definitely a perfect 10. Possibly the worst White Stripes album, but like I said, they're remarkably consistent in their releases. Everything, including this, is at the very least good. This was mainly a battle between Connor and Sufjan, and I think Sufjan wins out. I probably go back to I'm Wide Awake more, but I get so much more out of Illinois. 2006 is probably one of my favorite lists on here. I think it's pretty agreed upon that the Arctic Monkeys debut is their best project to date. It's authentic, fun to dance around to, and in general, I think these guys get way too much hate. Probably the biggest artistic statement from that year, Joanna Newsom delivers this fantastical chamber folk album that will send you into another time period altogether. I don't really know how to describe this other than iconic. This album in itself is a distinct cultural moment, and it deserves so much respect. Continuum is John Mayer's best album. For anyone that questions his talent, throw on Slow Dancing in a Burning Room and see what they say. Simply put, the best instrumental hip-hop album ever. Food and Liquor is another one that made me fall in love with hip-hop. Lupe is super unique, and his lyrics will prove that to you. Hell Hath No Fury, next to Food and Liquor, shows you what a year for rap this was. Grimy, braggadocious, and one of the best hip-hop albums of the decade. Back to Black absolutely kills me. A jazz pop album that was as good as it was popular. He Can Only Hold Her is one of my favorite tracks ever. This brand new album is possibly the first thing I'd show someone if they wanted to hear some super passionate, sentimental emo rock. I love Justin Timberlake's early stuff, and this might be his best album ever. It's smooth, it's sensual, and half of these tracks are probably among my favorite pop songs ever. This one was tough, and nearly all of them were up for contention here, but I think Continuum means too much to me to pass up. I've probably listened to it once a month for over a decade. 2007 is another year that we can probably skim through a little bit, being that there's one huge standout for me. This Justice album is fun, but I've never really given it too much thought. Don't worry, this is the last White Stripes album you'll be seeing on this list. Graduation is great, but it's not in the top of Kanye's discography for me. Sound of Silver has one song that I love and many that I just like. Boxer is great, but I've probably only checked it out a few times. Below the Heavens is super underrated, you should check it out. For Emma is moving but not perfect. This MIA album is a little rough around the edges, and I haven't listened to Person Pitch enough to have a real opinion on it. But In Rainbows is one of the best albums ever made. It's hard to believe that I'm trying to have a wide range of sounds when Radiohead keeps taking up spots on this list, but it is what it is. Videotape puts me in a trance every time I hear it, and honestly, it makes me super emotional. And as good as some of these albums are, I could probably do the same thing with 2008. Third is cool, but I haven't listened to it enough. Beach House can do a lot better than Devotion. There are a few great tracks on here, but I've never been a huge MGMT guy. The Carter 3 has a lot of ups and downs. Fleet Foxes can either amaze me or bore me depending on the day. The Preface is underrated, but it's good at best. This soundtrack is gorgeous, but I don't listen to it enough. 808s is great, but it's not one of my favorites, and Nick Cave is somebody that I respect a lot, but I've never really gotten into his stuff. But then Vampire Weekend's self-titled is an absolute joy from start to finish. This is my personal happy album, and it is so infectious. I didn't want to make this video aggressively long, so I decided to split it up into two parts. So far we've done 1997 to 2008, and in a few days you'll get to see the remaining collages and our finished list. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then. Hey, thank you for watching that video. Be on the lookout for part 2 coming soon. If you want to support the channel, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. You can follow me on social media at RenshawHS. You can buy my merch, support my Patreon, and thank you again. I'll see you soon.